On the Mediterranean island of Sardinia, it is not uncommon for people to wish each other good health or prosperity with a fairly specific turn of phrase that translates to something like, "May you live to 100." And in the late 1990s, some researchers decided to see just how many Sardinians actually followed through with that. Their findings took the world by storm, inspiring countless follow-up studies and health crazes, all focused on this idea that specific groups of people might have better odds of living to be 100 than others, and more importantly, staying healthy into the triple digits. These places are called blue zones, and we still don't really understand all the ingredients in the secret sauce that makes these places longevity hotspots. Naturally, proponents believe that mimicking exactly how people live in these blue zones can help people everywhere live longer. This is enticing, to say the least. But you may have heard that there is more to this story. But we're going to tell you that there's even more to this story, so let's take a look at whether we can really harness the power of blue zones to make more centenarians, or if this is all too good to be true. First, let's talk about how these areas got their name, because they were not called blue zones to begin with. And no, it doesn't have to do with like blue-haired old ladies. It's all about the little dog from the show Blue's Clues, actually. No. This concept started in Sardinia when, in 1999, researchers in the field of gerontology, or the study of aging in humans, found a high rate of very old folks on the Italian island. By their tally, somewhere between 13 and 16 out of 100,000 residents counted their age in 3 digits. Data from other European countries suggested a prevalence of 10 centenarians per 100,000 people, and the rate of centenarians worldwide was even lower. Because this was like a shocking and weird thing to have discovered, the rest of the scientific community was skeptical, to say the least. Critics pointed out that the counts were not just high, they were like suspiciously high. They argued that inaccurate record keeping and scammers have inflated people's ages for ages. But years later, when a researcher named Michel Poulin set out to verify the age claims of the island centenarians, he found something surprising. Poulin and his team discovered even more robust evidence that these Sardinians were as old as they said they were. They also found that the super old residents weren't evenly spread across the whole island. Most of them lived in the most mountainous province. Poulin's team plotted neighborhoods with high concentrations of centenarians with a blue marker on a map. Places where these marks converged enough to create a blue shaded area were dubbed blue zones. Their results were published in 2004 in the journal Experimental Gerontology. So now that the data seemed to support these blue zones, the next obvious problem to solve was how these elderly enclaves came to be, and whether we could copy what they did elsewhere to reach similar record-breaking ages. Genetics, of course, could be a factor, since geographical isolation in blue zones could lead to a concentration of beneficial genetic variants among these populations. Specifically, there are a few variants that we know are involved in biological processes that contribute to aging. These variants affect everything from inflammation to insulin signaling to fat metabolism. A 2023 study of DNA sequences from the extremely elderly in these blue zones found that these old-timers were way more likely to have one or more of these variants. And the authors argue that it could be the combination of that and lifestyle factors that contribute to these regions' frequent birthday celebrations. Actually, they still only happen once a year for each person. But there's more in a life. However, a 2024 study found that the correlation of these genetic variants in these regions was not strong enough to explain the concentration of living great-grandparents. Plus, the variants are not unique to blue zones. People all over the world have them. Overall, genetics can only account for a fraction of why someone reaches the oldest of old ages. But epigenetics, or the modulation of which genes are turned on or off, may be just as influential. Lifestyle habits like physical activity and nutritious food help modulate the activity of these genes in various tissues, and those protective habits can do big things, like protecting you from heart disease, keeping your bones stronger, or even preventing cells from growing out of control and turning into cancer. Ultimately, lifestyle and environment are the overarching factors influencing age attainment. And here's where things get a little bit weird. Around the same time that Michel Poulin's team published their results about an isolated blue zone in Sardinia, a journalist by the name of Dan Buettner was digging into the 100-plus-year-olds in Okinawa, Japan. For a while, Buettner and Poulin were working together and even found some additional blue zones, including Nicoya, Costa Rica, and the island of Ikaria in Greece. This work had led to a ton of media attention over the years, including a 2005 National Geographic cover story by Buettner and a Netflix docuseries released in 2023. Sadly, though, this academic dream team was not meant to last. Reports suggest that the relationship between the parties soured when Buettner began commercializing blue zones, and he even trademarked the term without consulting Poulin. Poulin also expressed concern that increased tourism and the associated products like cookbooks and skin serums undermine the integrity of ongoing scientific research. Buettner is not the only one cashing in on blue zones. There's a whole ecosystem of lifestyle influencers who try to market their products based on this idea. Now, beefs aside, both camps have continued their research into the blue zones concept, and they each have their own spin on how individual people can try to live like blue zoners and extend their lives. Buettner has a list of 9 habits and life philosophies that tend to be important to folks who have historically inhabited blue zones. He claims that incorporating them in other places can reverse engineer longevity. His list includes cultivating a sense of connection and purpose, eating until someone feels just 80% full, and having functional physical activity built into your lifestyle. So like gardening instead of like going to work out at a gym. These habits may be more common in blue zones, but they're not like the exclusive secrets that they're made out to be. Like, we know that loneliness and a sedentary lifestyle are harmful to health. Most public health officials already recommend avoiding loneliness and moving your body. So again, these aren't like magic habits unique to recognized blue zones. Reducing overall calorie intake and not regularly stuffing yourself are known to protect against all kinds of diseases over a lifespan, as are the benefits of loading up on plant-based foods. Meanwhile, the Poulin group's list highlights 7 lifestyle habits, most of which overlap with Buettner's. Having a chill, low-stress vibe is on both lists of longevity-promoting factors in blue zones, and it does seem like attitude and vibes matter more for aging than you would think. A 2018 study found that Sardinian elderly people were far less likely to be depressed, so part of longevity could be about maintaining a positive cognitive environment. And I personally would have a very easy time staying relaxed and happy if I lived on an island off the coast of Italy, so I can see why the Sardinians may have like a leg up there. While there's been a ton of work on the subject, researchers still haven't cracked the code on just what makes these blue zones so blue. And the reason they may be struggling could actually be that blue zones might not be real. This is the view of Saul Newman, a senior research fellow at the University College London Centre for Longitudinal Studies. His research has shown that most claims of centenarians, and especially supercentenarians, or those who reach upwards of 110 years old, could be chalked up to clerical errors in record keeping or the lack of birth certificate records. He found that in the US, after a state started issuing birth certificates, their rates of supercentenarians would inevitably drop by between 69 and 82%. Newman's absolute roast of the blue zone theory won him the 2024 Ig Nobel Prize, an honor bestowed on research that is both funny and thought-provoking. It is the first ever Ig Nobel in demography for what the award committee calls detective work to discover that many of the people famous for attaining extraordinarily old ages lived in places that had lousy birth and death record keeping. Now, it's worth highlighting that Newman's 2024 paper laying out pension fraud and clerical errors is still in preprint. This means that it is not peer-reviewed, and no academic journal has agreed to publish it. And the current version is a revision of one he wrote in 2019, which also never got published in a peer-reviewed journal. But Newman's criticisms aren't the only reason to doubt the blue zone hypothesis. In addition to the potential flaws in age records, there is also the weird issue where blue zones don't seem to last forever. For instance, while Okinawa used to be Japan's province with the most old people, it's now lost that title, and there's no clear reason why. There didn't seem to be any lifestyle or diet changes in the region, so there's not an obvious explanation for the drop in centenarians. It's also worth mentioning that the guidelines for living a blue zone life are pretty pricey. and most people can't afford to adopt these changes. If everyone in the world had access to nutritious food, high-quality medical care, a safe living environment, and enough leisure time to relax and avoid stress, it's possible that the whole world would be a blue zone. There's also a racially biased narrative at play. Now that the people of Nicoya aren't living as long, there are no currently recognized blue zones in Latin America, and there's never been a suggestion of a blue zone anywhere in Africa. That's probably more to do with a lack of research than a lack of old people, but that gap is telling in and of itself. Overall, colonialist and racist bias have contributed to gerontology as a field and how blue zones have been studied and publicized. It seems like blue zones might not be the simple secret to living a longer life, and only copying the diet of a bunch of 100-year-olds from Italy isn't likely to make you live longer. Based on what we know, helping more people reach the triple digits requires societal and global changes, like universal healthcare, better nutrition, lower pollution, better working conditions, and less stress. In other words, whether blue zones are real or not, there are aspects of those lifestyles that could help more of us live longer, happier lives. Even if living into the triple digits isn't really location-based, there are still true blue ways to maximize your chances at a long and healthy life.